6 months. That is how long the silence had lived inside Hannah Mercer's home. A silence so heavy it had its own weight, its own presence, its own shadow that moved through the hallways at night. 6 months since she had lowered Daniel into the frozen Massachusetts ground. 6 months since Route 2 became the most terrible stretch of road she had ever known. Hannah was 31 years old. She was supposed to be at the beginning of everything. A new marriage, a new baby, a new life stitched together with love and ordinary Tuesday evenings. Instead, she was standing in a kitchen that smelled like him, washing a mug that still had the ring of his last coffee at the bottom, trying to remember how to want anything at all. The cruelest part? She had been 7 months pregnant when they buried him. 7 months pregnant, standing at a graveside in Lexington, Massachusetts, her body still carrying the proof of their love, while the world asked her to say goodbye. 4 months later, a daughter arrived, Nora. Tiny, perfect, completely unaware that her father had existed. Completely unaware that her mother was slowly disappearing. Hannah fed Nora. She changed her. She sang to her in a voice that had forgotten what joy sounded like. But she was not living. She was surviving, and only barely. 3 months after Nora was born, Hannah was driving along Route 2A near the reservoir when she saw him, or what was left of him. He was a Cane Corso, where he had been once. Now he was a skeleton wearing the memory of a coat, brindle-colored, matted, ribs pressing against skin like questions with no answers. He was lying at the roadside, too exhausted to run, too stubborn to die. No collar. No microchip. No tags. No one had come looking for him because, apparently, no one had noticed he was gone. Hannah called a local rescue. The vet who examined him looked up from her clipboard with the kind of expression that prepares you for bad news. He was severely malnourished. Dehydrated. His muscles had begun breaking down for energy. She estimated his age at approximately 3 years old, his weight at 135 pounds. Though he should have been heavier. She said clearly, another night outside would likely have been fatal. His name became Titus. Hannah did not plan to keep him. She told herself she was just fostering, just giving him somewhere warm to recover. But grief does strange things to logic. And Titus, as it turned out, had his own ideas about where he belonged. Within 2 weeks, the 135-pound dog had assigned himself a post, beside Nora's bassinet. He did not ask permission. He simply placed himself there, a warm, breathing wall between the baby and the rest of the world. Every night, with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible for an animal his size, he would carry a tennis ball across the room and place it carefully inside the crib. No one trained him to do this. He simply did. And something shifted in Hannah. She began eating again. Not because she was hungry but because Titus needed walking and you cannot walk a dog on an empty stomach. She began going outside again, not because she wanted to but because he needed the air and somewhere along the way so did she. Titus did not fix her grief, but he gave it somewhere to go. The storm did not announce itself politely. It arrived the way all the worst things do, quietly at first and then all at once. By early evening the ice was coming down in sheets across New England. Power lines across Lexington groaned under the weight of it. At exactly 9 p.m., the electricity in Hannah's house cut out. The heating system, the one that had been keeping a 4-month-old infant and her grieving mother alive, went silent. Hannah had a fever. She had been fighting it for 2 days already, telling herself it was nothing, managing it with water and rest and the grim stubbornness of a woman who has already survived the worst thing she could imagine. But the cold accelerating through the walls changed the calculation entirely. Without heat, her fever had nothing to fight against. It began rising instead of falling. Titus stayed close. He pressed himself against Nora's crib, his large body radiating warmth. A dog's normal body temperature runs between 101 degrees Fahrenheit and 102.5 degrees Fahrenheit, measurably higher than a human's. In a house losing degrees by the minute, that difference was not nothing. That difference was everything. Round Pushpin 1:38 a.m., Hannah loses consciousness. She made it to the couch. She remembers pulling a blanket. She remembers thinking she should call someone. She does not remember anything after that. At 1:38 a.m., Hannah Mercer, 31 years old, alone in a house with no heat and a 4-month-old baby, lost consciousness. And that was when Titus understood that something had gone very, very wrong. Round Pushpin 4:02 a.m., Titus begins emergency barking. For nearly 2.5 hours, Titus had been doing what he could, body heat against Nora's crib, periodic nudges toward Hannah's unresponsive form. But the temperature in the house had dropped to a level that a dog's instincts, however powerful, recognize as crisis. At 4:02 a.m. he began to bark. Not the casual, distracted bark of a dog that heard something outside. This was acute distress vocalization, persistent, directional, escalating. Scientists who study canine behavior describe this pattern as a response to environmental threat when the primary caregiver is non-responsive. In plain language, Titus knew Hannah could not help herself, so he called for someone who could. He barked for almost an hour. Round pushpin 5:00 a.m., neighbor Walter responds. Next door lived Walter. 71 years old, a widower himself. He had lost his own wife 2 winters earlier, which is perhaps why he understood, better than most, that silence from a neighbor's house in the middle of the night is not always peaceful. The barking pulled him from sleep. He dressed quickly. He came outside. He found the front door. He found Hannah, unconscious on the couch, her breathing shallow, her skin burning and cold at once. He found Nora in her crib, cold but breathing, Titus pressed against the bars like a living furnace. He called emergency services immediately. The paramedics who arrived confirmed what Walter had feared. Hannah's fever had reached a dangerously high level. Nora, while not in immediate danger, had been exposed to cold conditions that required evaluation. Both were transported to hospital. Both survived. Round pushpin 3 days later, Hannah returns home. Hannah walked back through her front door 3 days after she had been carried out of it unconscious. The house had been heated. Walter had arranged that. Nora had been cared for by Beth, Hannah's sister, who had driven up from Providence the morning of the emergency. Titus was waiting at the door, tail moving with the restrained dignity of an animal who had done what needed to be done and saw no reason to make a fuss about it. Hannah sat down on the floor of her hallway and put her arms around a 135-pound Cane Corso and stayed there for a long time. The story did not end there. Stories like this never really end, they simply change shape. Walter, who had spent 2 winters alone since losing his wife, began coming by on Sundays. Not to check on Hannah, he was careful never to make it feel like that. He came to bring Titus a soup bone. This was his stated reason, and he maintained it with absolute sincerity. The fact that he stayed for coffee, and then for an hour, and then for an afternoon, and that Hannah started cooking enough for 2 on Sunday evenings, that was all coincidental as far as anyone could prove. Titus accepted his soup bone every Sunday with the dignity of an animal who has earned it. Dogs maintain a core body temperature of 101 degrees Fahrenheit to 102.5 degrees Fahrenheit, 38.3 degrees Celsius to 39.2 degrees Celsius. Measurably higher than the average human temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. In an unheated home on a New England February night, a 135-pound dog pressed against an infant's crib would provide meaningful, documentable thermal protection. This is not sentiment. This is thermodynamics. On emergency alerting. Dogs do not plan rescues. But they respond to distress with escalating vocalization when their primary caregiver becomes non-responsive, a behavior rooted in pack survival instinct. What Titus did at 4:02 a.m. was not a calculated decision. It was a profound, instinctive response to a world that had gone wrong. The outcome was the same either way. Unintentionality. It would be scientifically inaccurate to say Titus decided to save Hannah and Nora the way a human makes a decision. What is accurate is this: his bond with them, his distress at their vulnerability, and his instinct to vocalize that distress combined to produce an outcome that emergency services confirmed saved at least one life. Call it what you want. The result speaks for itself. You found him on a roadside with nothing left. And he spent every day after that making sure the same thing never happened to you. Hannah Mercer lost a husband on Route 2. She found a dog on Route 2A. She was 31 years old, alone and running out of reasons. Some people will tell you animals cannot love. That what Titus did was instinct, reflex, biology. Maybe they are right. But on a February night in Lexington, Massachusetts, when the power was out and the fever was rising and a 4-month-old girl had no one but a grieving mother who could no longer stay conscious, a 135-pound dog pressed himself against a crib, barked for an hour into the dark, and brought a 71-year-old widower to the door. You decide what to call it.